For years, the government has been using a secret budget to funnel billions of dollars to the wealthy. It exploded in use after the financial crisis that left so many Americans either homeless or barely holding on. This budget was used to bypass the president, Congress, and avoid public scrutiny. In this video, I'm going to expose this secret budget and show you how dictators, criminals, and even the wives of Wall Street bankers made off with hundreds of millions of dollars while the average American struggled to pay any of their bills. This is a story not only about greed, but about what really happens behind the curtain of Wall Street. A quick recap of the 2006 financial crisis is rich bankers who had no oversight bought mortgage-backed securities. These are a bag of thousands of mortgages all over the country. Typically, mortgages are a safe bet, or at least that's what they said when they sold these bundles of mortgages to pension funds and anyone else willing to pay. The thinking is correct because people do need somewhere to live and something to eat. The bundles of mortgages were then rated by a rating agency, which were either S&P or Moody's. They were supposed to look at the underlying mortgages and give them a rating. AAA was the highest. If a mortgage-backed security got AAA ratings, that means that the people who took out these mortgages all had really good credit, say a 680, and they put down anywhere from 15% to 20% in down payments. Someone who put down 20% of the house is way more likely to make all of their payments. They're not going to default because then they not only lose the house, but also the down payment cash. So if this is the type of mortgages that made up these mortgage-backed securities, we'd be great. But spoiler alert, they weren't. Many of the mortgages had credit scores of 540, which for a house is trash. They had almost no down payment, so the loan to value ratio, meaning how much the loan was when compared to how valuable the house was, came in at 95 or even 100%. And the low monthly mortgage payments they were told when they were signing the documents only lasted 6 months. After that, the payments ballooned. These homeowners were immediately unable to pay their bills. Bankers knew this but didn't care. They were able to sell these securities to anyone with a pulse. But these mortgage-backed securities were a house of cards, just waiting for one thing to bring down the whole system. And it did. Mortgage defaults started rising, and these securitized mortgages that were supposedly super reliable and top rated ended up being worthless. There were more and more defaults, and we were plunged into a financial crisis. People felt like their money wasn't safe in the bank, and we were super close to a good old bank run. This was during the 2008 election. George Bush was leaving office, Barack Obama was coming in. In order to save the financial system, the government thought, hey, remember that group of people that are directly responsible for the meltdown we're in right now? Yeah, how about we give them trillions of dollars of US taxpayer money, and then they'll lend it out and we can get credit moving again. That's like telling a 16-year-old who just got their license and then crashed the family car to then use their mom and dad's new car to pick up their younger sibling from school. Well, a key player in all of these bailouts was the Federal Reserve Bank. This was the bank that was lending money to banks. But as you know, after the banks got this money, they didn't lend it. They kept it and gave themselves fat ass bonuses. The Federal Reserve, now flush with trillions of dollars that's supposed to go to banks, had absolutely no oversight. And Ben Bernanke, the Fed chairman, and Timothy Geithner, the Treasury Secretary, devised genius ways to make rich people richer using their own pot of gold. The Rolling Stone article I read explained this in the best way. It is as though someone sat down and made a list of every individual on earth who actually did not need emergency financial assistance from the government and then handed them the keys to the public treasury. Now, one creation was TAF, which was short from Term Asset-Backed Securities Loan Facility. According to the Federal Reserve Bank of New York's website, it was supposed to provide financing to investors willing to invest in securitizations backed by small business and consumer credit, including student loans, small business loans, and auto loans in the asset-backed securities market, which in layman's terms means people who will buy loans that actually move the economy as a way to stave off a complete economic collapse. Sounds good, right? But this is what really happened. During the financial crisis, the CEO of Morgan Stanley was John Mack. Morgan Stanley borrowed $109 billion. His wife, Christy Mack, someone who has, according to any and all reports, had no financial experience. If she was going to be known for anything, it would be her charity and her interest in alternative medicine. She attained the level of master at Reiki, Now, Reiki is a Japanese practice of palm healing. Christie had a business partner, Susan Karches, who was the widow of Peter Karches, the former president of investment banking at Morgan Stanley. The closest she came to finance was her penchant for betting on thoroughbred racehorses. Now, let's say, for example, I went to the Federal Reserve Bank of New York during the crisis and said, hey, I'd like to get a loan. You and I know I wouldn't be allowed in the building. But Christie and Susan put $15 million up front and used this to get a loan of $220 million in cash. Again, these women had no financial experience. They didn't work at Morgan Stanley, and to my knowledge, never held an investment banking job. And this is during a time where the financial markets were in a complete meltdown. So why in the world would the Fed give these women $220 million? But let's say we ignore all sense of reality and logic and find a justifiable reason to give these women a loan. Cool. What the government didn't want you to know was the terms of this loan. Once they got the $220 million in cash, they used it to buy student loans and commercial mortgages like they were supposed to. Now, typically, when you make an investment, you take on the risk, but you also get to keep the upside. That's capitalism at its best. But what if there was an investment you could make where if the investment goes south, you're only responsible for 10% of the loss. But if it went up, you'd be able to keep 100% of the gains. Would you take that investment? Hell, I know I would, but that doesn't sound like capitalism to me. Sounds a bit like socialism. And this is the exact deal that these two women got. According to my research, the bank CEOs were claiming that they were so terrified of any and all financial product, and they wouldn't invest in anything unless, of course, the government guaranteed their profit. So the US government had to guarantee profit for private companies. Why didn't the US just buy the investments with their money and then benefit 100% of any and all profits? Oh, right, that would be socialism. But I guess if you only take 90% of the loss and not 100%, that then makes it okay. And just to be clear, I am in no way saying that socialism is the way. What I am saying is these bankers were 100% hypocritical. And we, you and I, the taxpayer, were left in the dust. What makes this worse is that these types of deals were secret. It was only recorded on the budget of the Federal Reserve, which was protected like it was Fort Knox. After numerous requests into a full accounting of the money, the Fed simply said no. It wasn't until an act of Congress in 2015, more than almost a decade after, that the Federal Reserve finally turned over their books. And if you think this loan to the wife of the CEO was it, you're mistaken. The Federal Reserve at this point, it seemed to have no limits of who could get the money. And it's companies that were not connected to the financial crisis and some who were not even American-owned companies that got money. Here's the list. The Fed made huge purchases of securities like stock in BMW, Volkswagen, Honda, Mitsubishi, and Nissan. At this time, the US automakers were struggling. So why would the Federal Reserve essentially inject millions and billions of dollars in foreign automakers? Sure, they sold cars here, but wouldn't it make more sense to send that money to Ford, GM, even Tesla? Now, while that makes sense, what I've realized doing this research is that when it comes to giving money to America's wealthy, logic has no role. And while giving money to foreign companies is completely asinine to begin with, I have one capital infusion that's even more ridiculous. Between December 2007 and February 2010, a subsidiary of the Central Bank of Libya received around $35 billion in loans from the Federal Reserve. The loans were paid to the Arab Banking Corp of Bahrain. The Central Bank of Libya owned 29% of this bank. Now, if you don't know, the leader of Libya was Omar Gaddafi. He was viewed by the US as one of the worst dictators ever and someone we desperately wanted out of power. So why then did a bank that he had control over receive billions of dollars in loans? And the interest on some of these loans were 0.25%. As a comparison, right now mortgage rates are around 6%. Then in 2011, President Obama issued significant sanctions against Libya. Now, these sanctions prevented any American from doing business with Libya while at the same time freezing all assets held by Libya. I remember the news clips. President Obama takes a hard line with dictator Gaddafi. But what's truly crazy to me is after these sanctions went live and there was all this pomp and circumstance, The Treasury Department, who issued the sanctions, quietly released an exemption for none other than ABC Bank. This exemption allowed ABC Bank to operate freely in the US with full access to the assets. The waiver was conditioned on the bank agreeing not to conduct any transactions with the Gaddafi regime, which in my belief was really just for show. The sanction exemption prevented the bank from conducting transactions with the Libyan government, but that doesn't mean the Libyan government isn't going to provide direction with how the bank operates. In a year where a sanctioned bank has 2 offices in New York and recently received tens of billions of dollars in nearly zero interest loans, there were legitimate businesses in the US that could not access a single red cent of capital. And if they did get a loan, you can bet it wasn't at 0.25%. And the ABC Bank wasn't the only one. The Central Bank of Mexico got $9.6 billion. The Korean Development Bank got $2.2 billion. Just to let you know that the single goal of the Korean Development Bank is to promote development in Korea. And the goal of the Central Bank of Mexico surely is not to develop the USA. You know what would promote development in the USA? Loaning that money to US businesses. Now, the final cherry on top of this whole situation is that along with the company owned by Christy Mack, hedge funds also received billions of almost free money. Because I'm sure hedge funds were really hurting for funds. And the hedge funds and Christy Mack's company had addresses in the Cayman Islands. Now, if you watch this channel, you know that the Cayman Islands is one of the preferred destinations for money launderers, largely because of their strict secrecy laws, but also it's a great way to avoid taxes. So if you were rich during the financial crash, the Federal Reserve was your source of a blank check. You could get interest-free loans, buy distressed assets, and if they all went to crap, only be responsible for 10% of the amount. Talk about America, land of socialism for the wealthy. That's all for today, guys. Let me know if you have any questions in the comment section below. Also, if you want me to cover another topic, put it in the comment section. And don't forget to like and subscribe. Peace, guys.